Hi, everyone. We are at our last session of the day. This is so exciting. I'm with Elanie Derrough. She's coming to us from the St. Louis area. And the title of her session today is Literate Language, Integrating Literacy Language into Your Early Childhood Classroom Every Day. A little bit about Elanie. She's currently an early childhood special education teacher. Her 18 years of experience in early childhood also include general education in kindergarten, first and third, as well as instructional reading, kindergarten through third grade. She has had a passion for language, literacy, and writing development of her students throughout her career. She has a master's in curriculum and development and a master's in reading. She currently lives in the St. Louis area with her husband and her two young children, making early childhood education her 24/7 job. And we all know what that's like sometimes when you teach the same age as your own children. That 24-hour job is you're on call all the time. All right, Elanie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and good luck.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Elanie Derrough, and I'm presenting, like Liz said, Literate Language, practical ways to integrate your literacy language into early childhood classroom. So I want to start off with just a quote. The basis for emerging literacy is that children have heard and listened. They have been heard. They have spoken and been spoken to. People have discussed things with them, and they have asked questions and received answers. And to me, this just means building oral language, listening and talking to young children, no matter what you're doing, is always building literacy. So today I'm going to be discussing some things that I've been doing in my room to purposely build literacy language. And just a side note, the book that this comes from, The Importance of Being Little, is a book I will gush about if you talk to me about early childhood for any kind of time. Erica's book really challenged me in thinking in all aspects of early childhood setting in a wonderful way. So if you teach preschool or kindergarten, I would highly recommend it. Liz kind of told you a little bit about me and my background. The job, I just mentioned this now, the job I work at now is John Carey Early Childhood Center. I have half of my students with IEPs and half of my students as tuition-based peer models. We have 2 half-day programs that are 4 days a week. So my students have 12 hours of instruction a day, making every minute for me as their teacher count. I do have para support in my room, but I am the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher in my classroom. So sometimes that brings about some challenges for me. I do live in St. Louis with our 2 kids. This above picture is what they look like when I can get them to settle down, but this is what we typically look like. We're a busy family with little kids. So like I said before, moving into early childhood special ed made me really have to think about how I want to integrate more language development. Currently in my classes, depending on morning or afternoon, I have 50 to 75% of students who are either language delayed or ELL. So language is really important in my classroom, and it's something that we have to build and work on every day. Also in past experiences and talking with reading teachers of upper grade students, I know that students who are struggling in reading usually remain in remedial reading for many years not because they're not reading print, but because they're struggling to comprehend the text. And more complex comprehension skills can come from conversations with students we're having about topics. It's built with oral language first, and that's something we can definitely do at the early childhood level. So I'm going to share some practical ways that I'm integrating language. There are 4 ways that I've really been focused on in the last few years. One is pre-telling. The next is social stories or shared writing. The next is repeated storybook reading and using a retelling center after doing that, and then word lists. And then the last thing that I kind of want to talk about before I talk about those things is that none of these ideas are really new or something that I created, that I have lots of great resources and people I talk to, but also these books in this picture have really influenced my teaching over these last few years. So the first strategy I want to talk about is pre-telling or thinking forward, which comes from this book in the top left corner, The Power of Retelling. And in the classroom, we use retelling stories to assess their comprehension. But I'm going to be honest with you, when I taught kindergarten and first grade, If a kid did not do a very good job of retelling a story, I wasn't the greatest at being able to help them retell stories. Mostly we just practice retelling over and over again, and it didn't necessarily help them improve. So when a former trusted colleague posted the picture of this book, I knew I had to check it out. And it's really meant for elementary school, but it takes retelling and breaks it into chunks. And this first chunk, pre-telling, is easily modified for preschool. So pre-telling, students often are asked to talk about books and show that they comprehend the text, but when do we teach students how to talk about stories in ways that make sense to the listener? Every day. We can use our everyday routines to teach retelling skills. We can use coming in the morning, snack time or lunchtime, walking in the hallway, hand washing, all of these ways routines that we do every day, we can use to practice retelling. So often when I have kids tell me about retelling something, they usually start with the last thing first. And I think that that's a typical response for little kids. They think about what they hear last. So here's how this works. You pick a routine you want your students to know. This picture that I have is our morning routine when they walk in the door. And you take pictures of your kids doing that routine prior to the lesson. So I don't really tell them why I'm taking the pictures. I just took the pictures and printed them out. And then I introduce the routine and ask the students to talk about what happens first, next, then, and last. And I use those words, I feel like, a million times when I say it. But I think that those words are important for them to know. I let them talk through it. And with my younger kids, my morning class is 3 to 4 and my afternoon is 4 to 5 typically. My younger class, I had to actually show them the pictures to help them remember what came first, what came next, what came then and last. My afternoon class, they told me and then I held up the pictures and we laid them out in the correct order. Then we acted out the routine. So in this case, we all went back to our cubbies. We put our coats on, we put our backpacks on, we all lined up outside and we practiced saying each step. And I said, first, what are we going to do? We're going to say hello to the teacher. So they come back in and they say hello to me. And next, what are we going to do? We're going to hang up our coats and our backpacks. And then we're going to put our folders and snacks in our cubby. And last, we're going to come sit at the table for our table time. After we did that, we went back to the carpet and we ordered those pictures. And I wrote out these words, first, next, then, last, and wrote these marker words for me. Now, if you had older kids, I think it would be perfectly logical to put a picture and put first we say hello and write the whole sentence. Or if they're old enough to read it and they don't need the picture clue, you wouldn't have to put all of this. But for me, I wanted them to see the picture and I wanted them to have a few words that maybe they might recognize or talk about with environmental print. And then you repeat, repeat, repeat. You do this over and over and over again. This is actually a screenshot, of something I did in my classroom. And just to say that it doesn't always look pretty. I have a language therapist that works with a lot of my kids and she does a language group in my room. So one week in January, she decided that she was going to do hot chocolate and talk about the steps that they use. So while they were doing it with her, I took pictures and I uploaded them onto my computer really quickly. I threw up this smartboard screen and put the 4 pictures at the bottom out of order, asked them to talk to me about what they did first, next, then, and last. And we ordered the pictures together. And then we talked through the event again. So you can do it in a new activity. I didn't do this for them to continue doing it. I did leave this out on the smartboard so that they could manipulate it on their own during free choice time. But other than that, I didn't keep it because we're not going to be making hot chocolate all the time. You can have them sequence the pictures with a partner using sequencing language. My para had printed off pictures of our routine, our daily routine, and had the kids sequence them and talk to her about them. You can have them do it independently. You can retell events that have happened in your story, or you can let them use it as a writing activity. This would be an excellent way to do a how-to book after you get done with this. So like I said before, my room, I only have kids 12 hours. If they come all 4 days, some of them can choose not to. So if I'm going to do something in my room, I need to have lots of check marks marked off my list of things that I need to teach them. So for me, it's important that it covers a lot of different areas in my room. So in this pre-telling, behavior improved around the routines that I picked. Everyone knew what to do. And also they would help their friends. Don't forget, next we do this. They can practice using those sequencing words. And then telling a story in sequential order really helps you in all areas of your life if you're thinking about it. It doesn't just pertain to comprehending and retelling text, but with writing development and solving math problems and social emotional growth, if you can tell the sequence of what happened to you out on the playground, it's much easier for the listener to understand. So this practicing of telling things in order from the beginning to the end will help them in lots of areas of their life. So my next thing that I want to kind of talk about is also that social emotional growth along with our literacy development. So social stories have long been used in special education world to help students with disabilities behave appropriately at school. Usually they consist of a repeated phrase that is the lesson of the book, and the students will read them over and over to create a script of how to behave. But all students can benefit from a script sometimes. This is really a moment as a mom that affected my teaching. So you'll see in this slide that it says swim lessons. And I wrote this social story for my son. He went to swim lessons for 2 weeks and was petrified, literally stood on the side of the pool for 40 minutes, maybe even 45 of a 50-minute lesson, and would not get in. And his teacher could not have been nicer, but he was not interested in trying it out. And so in an act of desperation, I went to another teacher and I said, please help me. What can I help him do? What can I say to him to help him? And she suggested a social story. So I started creating one, and about halfway through, I decided he needed to be a part of it. So I pulled him over to the computer and we made this swim lesson book about what happens during swim lessons together. And I kid you not, we read it at least 20 times before the next swim lesson, which was 1 week away. And when we got there, he started to fight me like he always does, to take his shirt and pants off so that he could be in just his swimsuit. And I said this line from the book: I will take my clothes off and wear my swimsuit when I get there. And without missing a beat, he said the next line in the book: I can wear my goggles if I want to. And then we talked through everything that the book said before he got in the pool, and he did it all, to much my surprise. So I started thinking, well, how can I use this in my room? How can I use social stories and shared writing in my room to help my kids? I can use it just like I talked about using it with the pre-telling. You can use it for any routine. One way I'm planning on using it when we get back from spring break is we're going to talk through how we solve problems with our friends and write a social story about it and read it a lot of times, because right now we're really struggling with that. You can use it for scary experiences, fire drills, tornado drills, or intruder drills, any special events, field trips, special visitors. This is one that I used in my room. We just finished our transportation unit, and we read Goodnight, Goodnight Construction Site for a week. And then we made this book, Hello, Hello Construction Site, because where I work is right across the street from a construction site connected to a hospital. And sometimes if our playground is muddy or we can't get on it, we'll take walks and we'll walk over to the construction site and look at all of the equipment. So my students have had experience with construction sites. So here's the beginning of our book. We read our book and did our work. It's time to head out on our construction site scavenger hunt. The sun is shining. It's time to work. So one by one, we'll find the trucks. Hello, crane truck. Hello. And if you've read this book, I kind of tried to follow the patterns of the language in the book when I wrote those first two pages. And we kind of talked about how in the other book, the trucks are getting ready to stop working because it's night times, but we're going to look at them during the day. So we want to talk about how they're starting to work, and we want to say hello to them. So what do they gain from social stories and shared writing? Improved behavior or social emotional growth, as I saw in my own son and as I see in my students. More practice sequencing and retelling of events. They're learning vocabulary development, getting some new words while they're reading and creating those books. Print awareness, story language. Like I said, we tried to really match the language of the book. And then they're getting that repeated reading of a story that has their pictures in it and it's a familiar topic, so they can read it over and over again. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is repeated storybook reading. And I first started getting interested in repeated storybook reading when our school adopted the Lucy Calkins units of study. I was teaching kindergarten at the time, and in the first unit, they kept talking about this work from Elizabeth Soulsby, and I just wanted to know more. So I read several of her articles, and then I read this book up in the top right corner, I Am Reading by Matt Glover and Kathy Collins, and it really talks about this work that Elizabeth Soulsby does too with repeated readings, and in their what they call emergent storybook reading. So to truly be an emergent storybook reading, it needs to follow a conventional storyline. The illustrations need to match the story. The plot needs to be easy to retell. There needs to be some type of repeating line, and it needs to hold the interest of your class. But in Kathy Collins and Matt Glover's book, I Am Reading, they also talked about using repeated readings with nonfiction and books that didn't necessarily match this emergent storybook reading piece. So I have used it in both senses. I've done it like the traditional emergent storybook reading with the little old lady who wasn't afraid of anything, Owl Baby, Where the Wild Things Are, The Snowy Day, The Gingerbread Man, The Three Little Pigs. A lot of fairy tales work for these. But I've also seen language growth with Brown Bear, Pete the Cat, Mo Willems' Gerald and Piggy books, Freight Train by Donald Cruz. And so they might not be good for the retell or typical story structure, but they can build everyday speech. And I teach with a lot of songs in early childhood, so never underestimate a book with a catchy tune attached. Songs, I think, is where I often hear first words from some of my students who are nonverbal. And I picked this picture because really my interest is making my kids feel like this. This is my son when he was 2 and my dad reading a book together. And I really want my kids in my classroom to feel like this as they're reading their stories. And we know that kids really love reading stories over and over and over again. And there's comfort in knowing that storyline line by heart. And they can work at higher levels or think about other things that they don't have to worry about what's going to happen with the story. They already know that part, so they can kind of deepen their thinking. So once you have read a story over and over and over again, you can do guided practice of the retelling. And I just kind of wanted to show you a little picture. This is a parrot in my room with a small group of kids doing The Three Little Pigs, and the little boy who's playing the wolf part actually has very low expressive language for his age. And the first 2 times that we read this book, he just sat and watched. He didn't say anything. He didn't respond. But you can see by her language that she's using that he's gaining language, and he's saying the language that he heard from the book. Whoops, I thought I was pressing it.
Over to the next house, right? Because the brick house is strong. Because it's built with bricks and cement. All of a sudden, They hear. Oh no! What's happening? It's Mr. Wayne.
And you can hear him say at the end that it's strong. So I love how she said, you know, this house is strong because it's made of bricks and cement. And then he repeated that word, and he knows that that house is strong compared to the other two houses that just blew away. So he's gaining that because he's heard that story 3 times before this day when he's practicing retelling, and he has a teacher that's able to walk through these pieces with him. So what kids gain from repeated storybook reading is new vocabulary, increased language output, like you just saw, concepts or topic knowledge, literary language structure, syntax, how stories work, that they know that print holds meaning, and they get that retelling practice. And then I just kind of wanted to mention that one thing that I do in my classroom that I think you could easily put into older grades if you have the time is I have a retelling center. So after we've read a book for a week, I will put out the pieces that they can retell the story. All you really need is a copy of a book, a felt board, and either felt pieces, or as you can see in both of these, I just have laminated paper and I have Velcro on the back of them so the kids can retell the story on their own. And this is also a little video of these two kids are retelling the story. This little girl has her doll over here, and her doll's listening to the story. But you can see how they don't agree with where the hat should go. And this little girl is referring back to the text to retell the story. This is a little old lady who is not afraid of anything. Whoops, again. And so she's saying I know it's hard to hear because there's always lots of noise happening when we're playing in our room, but she's saying wiggle, 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 because that's what the pants say. And he wanted the hat to go on top of the pumpkin's head, but she says, no, that's supposed to go behind her because they're chasing her right now. So he concedes because that's what the book says. So you can see that they're really practicing that language of the book, but then also remembering what happens in each section. And some other ways that I've seen retelling, in December, I always do the Gingerbread Man, and we read different versions several times. And kids will always amaze me at the way that they will play with those books if I just throw them out to be used and invite them to use them. So this little girl in the top 2 pictures, I had her last year, and she had some amazing thoughts about books. And in this book, she's reading The Gingerbread Baby, and you can't really see, but over here, there was a train table with different blocks, and each block represented a different character. And then she set up some taller blocks to be the woods so that they could run around in the woods. And she was checking the book to make sure that she had enough pieces for what she wanted to do. And then over here, next to that picture, she took the gingerbread girl and created her out of blocks. Excuse me. Down here, after we've read the Gingerbread Man for several weeks, or different versions for several weeks, everybody's over in the kitchen making gingerbread men, and their gingerbread men are always running away, and foxes are always chasing them. And then this little boy, he used the gingerbread man to tell his own story. You can kind of see this is the gingerbread man, and here's his fox. And he's practicing writing that book too. So it's really extending meaning in lots of different ways for kids. And if you're ever in a building where people discourage play in early childhood, which I feel like is unfortunately a trend that is happening right now in early childhood, I think being able to support how kids are using literacy in your centers is one way that you can advocate to keep it, because they're learning something. And pictures like these, sometimes if people are not educated in early childhood, they can connect this with kids learning, even though I believe all play is students learning. The last section that I kind of want to talk to you about is word lists with repeated readings or topic readings. So you could do this with your repeated readings that you're doing in your room, or you could do it with a topic read, just one book. So like I said before, we read Goodnight, Goodnight Construction Site. And even though we had been to the construction site, the afternoon class, because of weather, had obviously been there more. Usually in the morning, it might be too cold for us even to go on a walk. And so before I read the book, I really wanted kids to understand the setting of the book. And I pulled this actual activity from that, The Power of Retelling book also. And one reason that I really was drawn to this is because it talks about not only what is, but what is not. And so a lot of my students who have language delays, we have goals for them working on talking about pictures or picking a picture with descriptors. And what I noticed is that my kids could pick out the descriptors if it was, but they couldn't pick it out if it was not. So for example, I had pictures out for a student and I said, find a picture that doesn't have an animal on it. And he kept finding all the pictures that had animals because he didn't understand that word doesn't. And I thought, how am I going to teach him what a negative means inside of a sentence when he has all of these language delays? And so I found this, I went back to this activity and I thought this might help him. And actually after we did this, he got everything inside of this lesson 100% correctly. He understood after we did this. So that was exciting to see. So basically you pick something that has to do with your book. I picked the setting, but you could pick what's in a fairy tale and what's not in a fairy tale. It really, the possibilities are endless, but it's going to be nouns. So I asked them what is inside of a construction site. And I had some pictures up on the board because I wanted to make sure that we got the 5 trucks that are inside that book so we could talk about them. And so you have them list what they have in the category. And it's really gaining that topic knowledge and connecting their background knowledge, because what I learned from the Power of Retelling is that just because students have background knowledge doesn't mean that they know that they should activate it before they read a book. So this is really activating that knowledge that they already have. They just don't know that they need it until you tell them, hey, you might need this knowledge to read this book. So you can see that in the construction site, the things that they listed. One thing that I did talk about, they said digger, and I talked to them about how a digger can also be called an excavator, because that was the word that was used in the book. So I wanted to make sure that they had that word and that vocabulary and that connection to the word that they already knew before we started. And you can see over in the area that's not in a construction site, the first 2 are bones and fossils. And that's because a little boy in my room, when I said construction site and I started showing pictures of construction sites, his favorite thing in the world is dinosaurs. So what did he think we were studying? He thought we were excavating dinosaur bones, that we were looking for dinosaurs. And so when he said bones and he said fossils, I said, no, those are not on a construction site. Those, you would find those if you were looking for dinosaurs, but we don't look for dinosaurs in a construction site. We look, people are trying to build buildings in construction sites. So it really also not only helped us understand what a construction site was, but it helped us filter out knowledge that was not important or did not fit the construction site setting. And then the kids just got really excited and they started to try to get silly and they started laughing. You wouldn't see a playground. That would be so funny. You wouldn't see video games. So they really had fun with that, what you wouldn't do. So I did this before I read the book. And then I did that before reading, and you could do these other activities before reading the book, or you could wait until after you've read the book. I did this second activity after I'd read the book one time. And we've built sentences. So I took all those words from those cards, or I'm sorry, I took all those words from those lists and I put them on cards. I saw in the book that the author suggested the kids write the words because I think she's thinking they're a little older. She did not have pictures next to her words, but I wanted my kids to have the visual to go with it. So I made the word cards for the kids, and I put a picture and then the words underneath it. And then I gave them each 3 cards, and I let them decide where they went. A construction site has, a construction site doesn't have. And I had little A cards and little Ann cards also. I just couldn't find them when I was taking this picture, for them to build that sentence with teacher support, so that they could kind of see that, when the sentence structure changes, we have to add letters or take them away, or add words or take them away to make it make sense. And this is where I saw that little boy. I gave him his 3 cards, and I think I actually gave him a 4th because I had a few extra just to see. And he got everyone right. He knew what was on a construction site and what wasn't on a construction site because of all of that prior knowledge that he gained from our talk the day before. Something that I haven't done with my kids, but it's something I'm kind of excited about trying, is adding verbs or adjectives or adverbs. So you could take this a step farther and say, I can dig with an excavator on a construction site. I can pour cement on a construction site. I can push dirt with a bulldozer on a construction site. So you could add those verbs or talk about big, little, different aspects of those vocabulary words that they kind of built. And then afterwards, because I just collected them back up, making just a little predictable book for what is and what is not in a construction site. Any kind of extended learning with these cards that you could think of to add to that sentence structure. They're getting sentence structure practice and vocabulary practice and just topic knowledge practice. So what do they gain? Like I said, it activates prior knowledge, it builds topic knowledge, it clears up misconceptions, the use of negatives in oral language, like I said with that one little boy. You're working on sentence structure, you're building vocabulary, and then you're really front-loading that content and that vocabulary before you get started. And then my kids really noticed when something doesn't fit. So in that Goodnight construction site, the kids said, we're not going to see toys. And then the very first truck, when they go to bed, he has a teddy bear in his hand because they go to bed. Another one has a blanket on top. And they said, that, I can't even remember, crane truck has a teddy bear. Teddy bears don't belong in construction sites. And I said, you're right, they don't. So we know that this book probably isn't real because a real construction site would not have teddy bears. But why do you think he has a teddy bear? Well, he has it because he's going good to bed, and they're pretending that they're like you and that you have stuffed animals and blankets. And so I don't think that the kids would have even recognized that or noticed it if we hadn't done that work beforehand. So I guess that I went through really fast when I practiced this. I was a lot slower. I tend to talk faster when I get a little nervous, but I just want to thank you for listening to some of the ideas that I've had and I've used to build language in my classroom. If you have any questions or just want to talk shop, that's my email address. And again, these are the books that have highly influenced me as a teacher the last few years, and I would recommend them to anyone.
Thank you so very much for joining us today. We appreciate your expertise in the field of preschool and early childhood literacy. That is sometimes that is one tough gig. So we really appreciate your knowledge and sharing everything with us today. We hope that all of the participants have enjoyed today's presentations. And I personally want to send out a heartfelt thank you to all of of you who registered for this event and who have donated to this event. Remember that every penny of your registration fee goes to support the orphans in Tanzania. And if you know of others who would like to donate to this worthy cause, but were unable to join us today, we will be taking donations for Africa Compassion on pdforacause.org until March 30th. And all the names of those who have donated will be placed in a drawing for a beautiful handcrafted bookcase quilt. And we'll announce the winner on March 31st on our website, pdforacause.org, as well as we'll notify the winner by email. So thank you again so very, very much for spending this day with us. All of the presenters and all of the participants know that everything that you've done today goes for a very worthy cause. So my heart is full. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.